Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. My guest for this episode is Yani San Luis. She is the founder and CEO of the Win Woman, a management consulting firm trusted by nonprofit CEOs to drive strategy, revenue growth, and impact. Three things we all love. She's raised over $23 million for nonprofits and trained over 2,500 executives in sustainability and social impact. She has partnered with organizations like AARP, the Latin Grammy Culture Foundation, and Teach for America, leading high-impact trainings and speaking at NMSDC and USHCC and other leadership forums. Her work helps nonprofits secure major funding, deepen donor engagement, and expand their impact. Welcome, Yani. Before we dive into things nonprofit leadership, strategy, and fundraising, would you share a little bit about yourself personally so our guests can get to know you as a whole person?
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for introducing me and for having me on your platform. I'm looking forward to sharing some wisdom today. Something personal. I've been a professor for the greater part of 8 years in the marketing side, and it kind of drove me when I was getting my MBA a long time ago, nearly 10 years ago. I wanted to shake things up in education. So I was thinking to myself, I knew I was going to own a business one day, but I thought to myself, one of the ways I wanted to do this was becoming a professor. And I did so in mentoring many students. And so that's something that's personal to me. I love mentoring students. I work with a number of organizations that are co-curricular organizations like FBLA, PBL, to coach and mentor high school and college students. So that's a little bit about me. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's dive into things funding first, because that's always on nonprofit leaders' minds.
Absolutely.
And I'd love for you to just kind of touch on, what is your take if I say, what's a sustainable funding model? Just lay out what that means to you, what that starts to look like.
What ends up happening a lot of times, especially for the nonprofits in the room, is we start thinking about nonprofits. We think about the mission. We think about how we're driven, and we're driven by that, right? We're driven about the mission, the passion that we want to, the impact that we want to see. And we're not necessarily thinking about the business function of how it all is going to work, right? And it's really synonymous. So it goes together. And one of the number one rules in business is follow the money, right? It's how are we thinking about where the money is coming from, where it's running out, understanding and not being highly dependent on one source of income. And that is just business 101, right? If you feel that you have 50% or more dependency on one funder or one line of business, well, it's high risk, right? And so this is what's been happening in the market over the last almost 6 months, where nonprofits are being cut federal funding because all of a sudden it's no longer available. And so this is an opportunity and time when we work with our clients, we do this, is how do we de-risk you from some of those higher funding opportunities that you currently have? How do we diversify you, right? Whether it's individual donor giving, corporate giving, estate legacy giving, diversify your portfolio and think about giving in a different way and not just rely on one funder. And so to me, sustainability is all about diversification of where the funding sources are coming from. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to kind of dig deeper. You brought up this term risk, which
Mhm.
really resonates with me. And I think so many nonprofits just think like all money coming in is good money. But I have a feeling that is not true. Like, where are the risks in various funding models? I mean, you kind obviously, recently many organizations have lost federal funding. They weren't expecting it to be risky.
Mhm.
Although I know I'm sitting here thinking like, I've known that most grant-based funding comes with a certain amount of risk all along because especially in the private foundation space, none of them want you to be dependent on that, right? So it's never going to be forever money.
Mhm.
So, but can you just take us through a little more like what are these risks that people should be aware of with different funding sources and models?
I think a part of what we need to think about as it relates to risk is whether or not this funding partner is even a right fit to begin with. And that is huge to think about, right? Because a lot of times we get complacent where we think, oh, we have a great grant, maybe a seed funding grant of 200,000. And sometimes we get a little delusional when we're thinking, oh, but if I can impress them enough, if I can go be above and beyond, we can renew this. And when it's very clear cut that this was a really seed funding. And so you got to lay out expectations for your team on those things. And then other things that I have to also share with you. Sometimes private foundations or even private public foundations with government funding are very cumbersome for a small nonprofit to actually report on, right? And so I say this because in order to, and I'm not trying to sound facetious, but I'm just being real here. In order to even just apply for one of these grants, nothing short of giving your firstborn child's name is on the application. It's so robust and it's for, $50,000. And then the reporting on the follow through side, you need to almost have a data team to report on the metrics of that grant. And so you have to think to yourself, even if this is in alignment with our mission, is it worth pursuing at this time? And so these are some of the qualifiers that you have to think about when you are associating and when you're thinking about even entering into a partnership with the funder is how do we realize, and we always often as nonprofits sit on the end of, I'm always requesting the money, but it's a two-way street. This is a co-created process and partnership with the funder and whether or not that funder is truly a right fit for us. And so that's what I'm thinking about, especially on the de-risking side. We can do that a little bit more on the front end versus, trying to renew a grant when it's over.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. And your example also makes me think of a client who had a reimbursable federal grant, which for those of you listening, right, that means they agree to cover the expenses, but you have to pay for them first, submit receipts, and then often wait many months to get reimbursed. And this organization hadn't considered their cash flow, and they ran into a situation where they were at risk of not being able to pay for the services to even get reimbursed in the first place. So that's like another way of being able to, quote, afford a grant.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of those situations right now. We had several clients that were impacted by the federal government cuts as it relates to grants, and they had to lay off a number of team members. And it was exactly that reimbursable grant structure. You have to determine this might not be the model for me. And that's okay. You're not at that level of a nonprofit. You have to be self-aware of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a risk there. I mean, I think people weren't expecting the government to kind of like renege off and signed contracts.
Of course.
But it has been common for a long time for that timeline to potentially extend to a very long time between when you spend the money and when they actually give it back to you. But I can imagine those nonprofits who outlaid money and now they're not going to get reimbursed. I mean, that is a huge level of risk. Anytime we put money out, we're somehow potentially at risk, of getting it paid back.
Right.
That's the expectation. I want to dig into around diversification because people throw this word around, but whenever I talk about funding diversification with a professional like you, there is definitely a good kind of diversification and a bad kind of diversification. So I'm wondering if you can kind of like not this kind, but this kind of diversity.
Sure, absolutely. So we're talking about revenue diversification. We're talking about what are we thinking through. So I always think to myself, and when I'm asking our clients, when we're doing, at the beginning of an engagement, and we're kind of discovering where they want to go, what funding models they want to look at, and that sort of thing. You have to understand where giving trends are going. And I'll tell you, Giving USA right now had reported and has been reporting for a number of years that over 60% of unrestricted giving is coming from individual donors, which is an indicator that if you're not providing and robustly pouring into an individual donor campaign to amplify your efforts in unrestricted, which frankly is a nonprofit's dream. If a donor says to you, here, I'm going to give you 100K and I trust you to do it for your whatever greatest need is, you want those donors. You want unrestricted funding. If you're not pouring into that, well, to me, that is a huge yes. We need to be able to, that's a red flag if you're not pouring into it. But yes, do pour into individual donor giving. I will tell you a number of other pieces that right now the market has been seeing a lot of turn in, which is I'm not necessarily a big fan of, which are galas, right? It might work for traditional, it depends on the geographic and localization efforts of where your nonprofit is. Maybe you have older donors that enjoy that. That's a place of connection. That's an awareness. And God forbid that you cut this, the board won't allow you to do it. I completely understand that. But we realize that the capacity of your team maybe is very lean. And to just put on a gala every year, it's taking a lot of capacity from the team. Whereas if you hired essentially a development officer to raise those funds, you essentially would get nearly 3 times that effort of what you're raising in one night. And so I say that because also trends are moving where corporate is no longer, they're just not sponsoring at the level that they used to. In fact, whereas they used to fund for both events and programmatic or direct impact effort, they're asking you to choose, right? They're asking, what do you want? Do you want it for the event? Or I'd like for us to give you a higher level gift, with impact driven numbers and it could directly funds your impact, right? And so I say this because corporate is navigating those pieces as well. And so you have to kind of understand where your donors are, where your market is. I would highly say that something that's been really working really nicely, Sarah, has been around the subscription or membership models. People really enjoy those pieces. They are piloting more so monthly giving programs with exclusive updates, community perks, branded experiences. That is working very well. Not so much, I mentioned that the downturn of those galas type events. These are some things that are not working. You also want to keep in mind how you're speaking to this, right? Because I'm a big advocate. One of the proficiencies that we help our clients do in the nonprofit space is increase your unrestricted donor giving. That is our expertise because we want to make sure that you are free to be able to pivot when you need to, just like if you got cut from the federal government grants, this is an opportunity now to then pivot, whatever gift is coming. Maybe that was allocated to a program or you thought you wanted to earmark it to a program. Well, you got to pivot it to something else because you're at risk of this program being cut. So for us, and I would say one of the tips I do have on this end is how you're speaking to your donors about the investment, because it is an investment versus a gift. And high performing nonprofit CEOs are speaking and reframing unrestricted giving as an investment, inviting donors to help them build capacity, systems, sustainability. This is what gets a funder to say, I don't want this one grant or one donation that I'm going to give you to just die there on the vine, right? We want to make sure that we extend that. So I hope that helps. It's like, these are some of the trends that are happening. These are some of the things that are good for you to do and things that I'm seeing that, we want to move away from.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a couple things. Expanding your base of individual donors is diversifying.
Perfect. Absolutely.
Jumping around between galas and donors and grants and corporate sponsors is probably not quality diversification
Correct.
because you're not be able to lean into those systems of scaling up, making something more efficient through a system. And donors are interested in that. I think I really see that. I hear other people saying that. I don't hear it as I'm kind of highlighting it. Like donors, when you say a lot of them are smart about money, right? Especially large donors who can give larger sums are often smart about money. So when you say, I want to invest in infrastructure, I want to invest in systems, I want to invest in capacity building,
Sure.
they speak that language. They're like, yes, those are all good things. And one other thing I just want to highlight that you kind of mentioned in there was the word trust. You mentioned it earlier, but I think, a red flag for me is if your donors are insisting on restricting their giving, then probably they don't trust you enough yet to be a great donor. Because they should trust you with the money, right? To be a good investor.
Absolutely. I would even say this is an opportunity to understand and ask the questions. Like what are some of the hesitations you may have? Or can we pilot with these funds? Can we pilot this model that I'm sharing, maybe on a lower side of a donation so that you can see some of the results of this, right? And, and see where this goes, right? Having honest conversations with your donors and the impact is always going to be front of mind. Also, I would say having uncomfortable and bold conversations often. So what I mean by that is during the pandemic, you saw a little bit of an uptick in this where people were calling their donors and saying, whatever program that you just funded, we can't run it right now because, we're in the middle of the pandemic and it's basically front facing with children or what have you. But I'd like to use these funds for something else. I don't think that donors, and this is where a lot of times we fall victim to this, two things. We're accepting money and we are essentially, when we are pricing things out for a program, we're not pricing them adequately. And we are not asking for enough of the funds or the reality here, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I sure feel that it's absolutely outdated, which is donors that think that they don't want any percentage of the gift to go to overhead. And that's absolutely unrealistic. There are people that it takes to run programs and there needs to be a percentage. I'm happy to report that the trends are showing based on Florida Alliance of Nonprofits was sharing that over 60 still feel of donors, like over the age of 60, still feel a little bit of that way on the overhead crunch. But more and more, this new generation of donors, the 50-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, the 20 and 30-year-olds are really understanding that there needs to be overhead costs to run programs when they're giving. And so donors don't always want to hear the good news of things that are happening. They want to understand what's happening and what's not working well, right? We are saying, when we pitched this to you, we made the following assumptions. This is not the way it's going, but here's what we'd like to pivot this into, and we'd love your support on that. Or your advisory services, your advice, your mentoring on what we can do with this. This is my opinion, or these are my thoughts as a CEO of nonprofit. This is where I'd like to take it. And so having that open line of communication is what's going to get you to build more trust and have that trust-based philanthropy that the industry is calling for.
Yeah, I want people to if you can just rewind right there because you just I love my clients love it when I spoon feed them the language. I'm like, this is exactly what you're going to say. And then they rewind the coaching call recording so that they can, now everything's transcribed and it's easy. But I think you really modeled some language for folks, right? It's real. It's compelling. Donors want to hear it. They don't expect you to have, solved all the answers before you found them. And they don't even want you, right? For some donors, that's going to be more exciting to forge new pathways than others. So I think that's really, really, gold nugget. And I'd love for you to share if you have more, or just because I think people need to hear this language, right? It doesn't get talked about enough. What are the things you can say in a conversation with a donor I'll give you a few buckets, but add your own here, to help them understand why a gift should be unrestricted, to move from funding restricted to a program to I like to call it operating instead of overhead because it sounds important, like not to cut operating. That sounds like you need it. Overhead sounds
We need to,
extra.
right, we need to keep the lights on. I will
Yeah.
share with you, in just a couple of things of like common mistakes that nonprofits make
Right.
around these spaces. So I will tell you, unrestricted giving is a trust ask and not just a funding ask. And so one of the things that I see as a common mistake all the time is you're talking to the donor and you're over explaining where every dollar goes. And I say this because it's like trying to justify unrestricted giving with a pie chart and overhead expenses backfires. It always backfires. And high capacity donors want to trust your vision and not expense breakdowns. They don't want that. And so I say this because
Yeah.
when you're having a conversation, we need to be better about storytelling the impact that you're currently having and saying something along the lines of, Jane, you've been a loyal donor to us for many years. I want to share with you the ripple effect of your donation and let you know that your dollars towards our X program have impacted this. This is what I want to propose to you. I'd love to be able to expand this program. This is my vision of what we can do for this. So imagine if we took your initial funding for this and we expanded it by this. These are the levels of support that I'm seeing. These are some of the outcomes I'm seeing. And so I'd love for you to help me, like, how can we make this happen, right? And like, how can we co-create this together? That's the type of vision as a CEO that your donors are trusting. That's the type of data storytelling they want to see. And I say data storytelling because it's not just something that I find that's happened every year, right? And this is, if you're in the youth programming space, you probably have some kind of back to school campaign that is happening with backpacks and a drive and things like that. And I will tell you, it's very admirable. I think it is an admirable campaign. I think it goes beyond just backpack distribution of 1,000 backpacks. It goes beyond what's the economic impact of those 1,000 backpacks and those children? What's happening there, right? What's the the dignity that's restored with among some of these children? This is the type of language that we're thinking about. Frankly, nobody cares if 1,000 backpacks has been distributed, right? What's the long-term effect of a child being able to go to school and not be bullied because they don't have the right equipment to go to school with? Like, these are the type of things that we got to think about. And those stories are ways that we help clients pull out that data storytelling and help them really redefine how they can speak to their donors more proficiently and frankly, even at a higher capacity to earn more dollars for their organization.
Yeah, such great tips and great examples. And you really, I think, shared some good language around, this fine point, right? Sharing these stories. They're like examples of what the money can
Right.
do, what it might do, what it will do. But they are not promising, right? Your money's only going to this program. Your money is going to the whole system that makes these results happen, right? And you're sharing the story as an example, which is very different than language that locks you in and implies a restricted gift towards a program. And I know from some recent conversations with clients that like that's a subtle but very important distinction because I think folks get hung up on that. How can, if I start telling a story, they're like right down the rabbit hole in their mind,
Yes.
not the donor's minds necessarily. So these are subtle shifts
Mhm.
that make for powerful conversations, right? That lead to a lot more money, right? Because a bigger vision is more exciting often to invest in than something very small. Really, really great tips. Well, we are coming up on time so fast, and I feel like we're just
I know,
scratch
right? We can go into it. So
the surface. Really. Any other before we totally run out of time? Any other kind of please avoid this tips for our listeners?
I do think that the one last piece that I want to stress on that I don't think folks are doing enough of these days, and this impacts directly your bottom line, is how you're stewarding your donors, how you're specifically thanking, and not just thanking them on an email and a phone and automatic email and your tax receipt and maybe a handwritten thank you card. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about really being able to pick up the phone and not just be at times where you need to ask them for money again. Because if that's the case, you're not stewarding them properly. And the reality is that we cannot afford in this market, no nonprofit can afford the turnover rate of new donors and that churn rate. We need to be able to accept, attain, and retain the donors that we have. And in order to do that, it's going to be high impact and high touch approach. And so that means that if I'm the CEO and we can categorize different levels of who I should be calling, but I should have a call list on a weekly basis and I'm touching base with my donors, just checking in, not asking them for money. But if I know that their daughter goes to ballet or that their son just got back from a tournament, or what have you. These are all things that could be kept in your CRM. We're touching base often with these donors. We're texting them, we're voice noting them. We are being innovative over the way that we're outreaching besides just the emails and the newsletters and the follow-up. We're building trust-based relationships. And just like you reach not only on the individual side, the reality is that there are individuals inside of corporations and private foundations as well that warrant your ability to build a relationship with them. And so I say this because that is truly your pipeline to understanding and retaining and upgrading, frankly, the current existing donors. And so to me, when you master, if there's any funds that you have to pour into your stewardship process, you pour it in immediately because that is what's going to upgrade the existing donors that you have.
Yeah, 100%. I just want to repeat what you just said. In some other words,
Sure.
if you want more money, or if you are struggling with having enough money, you need to invest more in donor stewardship in this process of building relationships with donors. That is so key. So many folks are just like, we don't have enough money, let's cut expenses. And that is the opposite thing you should do. I mean, maybe I like to say like redirect, right? Sometimes you should actually maybe cut your programming expenses and move some stuff over. I know nobody wants to hear cut your programming expenses,
Right.
but really, do you want the whole shit? Or would
Correct.
you like to temporarily pause a program, raise enough money, and have everything carry on, in a thriving way?
Absolutely. I mean, I will tell you, I had just recently spoken to a pretty large healthcare foundation and had a new CEO. And she mentioned, when I got here, it was embarrassing. We were only sending out donor acknowledgement letters of their gift and we weren't doing anything else. And, in us just turning on the switch there of doing high impact stewardship. And I'm not talking about this, Sarah, this doesn't require big budget dollars. It requires time. It requires talent. It requires intentionality and a system to be able to have conversations. Book some time on your calendar for call time and all you're doing is just checking in on people. How are you doing here? Gaining observations. I used to work in higher ed, and a dean I had used to say quiet observations of your donors, right? What are these quiet observations that we can ping and follow up on? Is there something that we can be a resource to them for, right? Are there connections that we can make some of these individuals to? When donors, I've had a situation where donors were in between jobs, and I remember that we introduced them to their next following job, and they achieved that. They were so grateful for that relationship, right? Just being giving in that way and having the best interest of it really being a win-win situation here. That you're just not taking from the donor, you're also providing them with a resource. You are a go-to. You're expanding the ecosystem of where you live in their own life. And so that is what's going to make you a trusted and a strategic resource. And so when they have to cut budget, you're top of mind because imagine, look at all the effort you've output for that. So stewardship, number one, is definitely the way to increase your donor contributions.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned some words for folks who are out there saying like, okay, but like, what is this stewardship thing? Like, what do I actually say? But you've said systems and you've said pipeline. These are the magic words of doing this in an efficient, effective way and having to like sit down there and drum up exactly what am I going to do? Do you want to talk like us through what a pipeline might look like, what those steps might be. I'm happy for folks to share my own examples too, but let's hear from you. Like an example, what are the stages of this pipeline?
Absolutely. And so we normally build alongside our clients within their CRM system a pretty high impact nurture sequence. That's what we call it, a nurture sequence. And so we define this with our clients as far as the threshold. We categorize different gift amount. We realize that not you can't if you have over 1,000 donors, there's no way you're going to be calling them every single week. That's not realistic, right? But we categorize them based on donations, based on the impact that they're having. Your board members should be living with you on a monthly basis. They should know what's going on. They're high priority donors, right? So we tier it high priority donors. And I also love to make sure that if it's a first time donor, we are very much celebrating that first time donation. It does not matter how much it is. Like we are absolutely onboarding that donor into our ecosystem. We're so grateful. We're so thankful. We are making sure that that onboarding process is just as important as, even a high priority donor. And you can establish those thresholds for your own organization. But number one, it's about categories. Let's establish thresholds of where you want to play in. And some of the type of stewardship levels that we're going to do. Is it a phone call? Is it a board member that's going to call? Is it maybe one of your program participants that will call or send them a note? Is also understanding their preferences. There's some individuals that don't want to be bothered strictly. It's like writing checks. And that's okay.
Yeah, I have a client who has a donor like that. I'll keep donating as long as you only reach out once a year.
And that's okay. That's absolutely okay. We enter that in as a note in our CRM system of the way segmentation is going to be your friend. What type of information they want to receive when. So I think to me, the biggest pitfall that you have to avoid, Sarah, and the listeners on your call, on your podcast, is the one size fits all approach doesn't work, right? Can't treat them all the same. Unrestricted donors, they want to see scale, innovation, systems impacted. And so, and others have a relationship first approach, right? And so we have to really sit with our donor data. We have to think about who are the ones that have been giving to us loyally over the last 3 years, the last 5 years. I won't get into some technical terms, but like live bunts and side bunts last year, but not this year, some year, but not this year. Pulling that donor data, understanding the segmentation, what's the recent activity they had with us, and then start categorizing them. If you have a CRM system, that will be the best way to do that. And then start writing some notes. This is where you have your matrix, the people who you're going to ask for money from, right? Your matrix of donors, that's where it should come from, the most loyal donors that you want to upgrade. And then you should have your stewardship portfolio of who are the ones that they might need a little bit more cultivation. Maybe they gave the first time, but we're not going to hit them up again, right? Immediately in the first year. But we have a little bit of that segmentation approach that your CRM can prompt you, and it could be a little bit more automatic. And right now with the use of AI, we can do another show on that. But the use of AI in fundraising, there's a lot of automatic and system automation that can happen that can help you with when you're a lean team. So that's what I mean by that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I hope that gets people's mind turning. Well, tell us before we have to go, what kind of folks do you love working with most, and how should those folks reach you?
Absolutely. So for me, I'm always thinking about where our nonprofit leaders are in their readiness levels of hiring a consultant. So to me, if you're in a level where, you maybe didn't build the organization for growth, but you're feeling like you're just surviving these days, right? Maybe your funding sources or your funding strategy is too highly dependent on a couple of sources of income. This is an opportunity that's a right fit for us of folks that we work with. Or maybe you're highly invested in programs and maybe have neglected a little bit on the infrastructure wise, and you want to scale, right? You want to scale your business over your organization. I consider you a business as well. You want to scale over a certain amount. That's also a right fit for us, is helping with the burnout that's happening, the turnover. We're trying to be able to work with lean teams that can grow fast. And so that's some of the right fit clients that we work with. happy. You can reach me at thewinwoman.com. That's our website. You can share and online, right? So my email is Yany, YANY, at thewinwoman.com. If you want to shoot me a note and just impart some capabilities and we can have a call, happy to do that as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Yany. And thank you out there for tuning in and everything that you do to make our communities better. Before you go, I have a small favor to ask. Would you take a moment to like and review this podcast, if that's possible, from wherever you are, and share it with a friend or colleague who could benefit from this conversation or other conversations we've had on inspired nonprofit leadership. Until next time, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.